Hello, everybody. Thanks very much for joining us today. My name is Eileen Burbidge. I'm the Executive Director at Fertifa. Really pleased to have you with us. The conversation today is titled Looking Ahead to World Menopause Day and How to Put Menopause Support in Place in Your Workplace. With me, I have the pleasure of chatting to Dr. Gideon Lieberman. And Gideon, could you introduce yourself, please? Because I won't do it justice, but it also gives me a chance to follow you up in case you're too modest. I'm going to add to it.
Okay, hi. So, hello, everybody, and thanks for joining us. My name is Gideon Lieberman. My occupation is a consultant obstetrician gynecologist, and I'm also a subspecialist in reproductive medicine and surgery, which means hormones, fertility, menopause. My clinical role, I have a split role of work alongside Eileen at Fertifa, and I also have a very clinically dominated world dealing with women, couples with subfertility issues requiring IVF and so on. And also a large part of my work is dealing and helping women with menopausal symptoms. And also I do a lot of training for nurses, doctors, GPs, the public around menopause. I've been a consultant gynecologist since 2007, and I've been in the world of reproductive health since 2002 mainly. So I've gone through my own journey with the menopause world, and it's a whole sea change now that's happened over the past 5 years with menopause in the workplace. And I remember very clearly when World Menopause Day started being introduced, and it was kind of laughed at a little bit, but now it's a really important part of sort of my world, and it fixes a point in time. And it's very exciting actually to be talking about World Menopause Day, which is normally later in the year, actually in the beginning of summer now. So and I think that's really good because it shows us all that there's going to be, it's not just one day a year, but we're going to be looking at this all through the year, and hopefully we'll come on to some of the reasons why that's so important as we go through the webinar today. So it's great to be talking about it so early in the year. That's about it, Eileen.
My sound. Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah,
sorry about that. So thanks so much. And actually you've said exactly what I was going to open up with, and you were still modest as you always are, but not overly modest. So I won't add too much to your background, but other than the fact that you are one of the leading voices in the medical community here in England. And so as somebody who is going through perimenopause now, I'm grateful there are people like you and others who started paying attention to women's hormonal health and particularly menopause as early as you did. So having said that, I'm going to pick up on something that you mentioned there, which is obviously World Menopause Day is indeed in October, and Menopause Awareness Month is in October. So people might be thinking, why are you doing this in July? But the reason we're doing that is actually quite concerted, which is we imagine there will be a flurry of webinars, materials, conversations, panel sessions, and events all around menopause in October. And surely Fertifa will do the same, because it is the time to shine a light on the topic and to make more people aware of it, as well as what types of support and resources are available. But we think it's equally as important to signpost and to help organizations get ready in advance of those events and in advance of maybe their employee networks or their colleagues asking, what do we do about menopause? And so having the conversation now is intended to start to surface, bring up, expose, generate ideas, and brainstorm what can be done in the few months that we have before the next World Menopause Day, and what an organization could start thinking about in advance of October. So that's the reason we're here today. And again, we're both really pleased to have you here in order to start the conversation and also to make sure that our comments are relevant for all of you. We are going to start with a poll. I threatened this to some of you who might have been on from the earliest minutes. Hopefully you can see these now. Don't know if they're on screen or if you have to click on the poll, but people are starting to click through. So I'm taking that as a very good sign. Only 2 questions. Wasn't meant to take too long. And as you can see, the questions are simply just to make sure we know who we're speaking to and how informed or how maybe mature people are in their respective workplaces development regarding menopause policies and support. It's whether or not your workplace already has a menopause policy in place. Yes, no, or I'm not sure. And then largely for those who might say no, or I'm not sure, do you think your workplace should offer some form of wellbeing support for menopause then? And actually, maybe you've answered yes, that there's a policy in place, but you're unaware of maybe what support is available. And so that's what we're looking to. The counter shows me that this poll now has been exposed or up for about 55 seconds. I'll just give it another 3 seconds now. That's going to be 60 seconds to give everyone even a minute, although I'm seeing that we are waiting for maybe a few more people to answer. But we've got 87%, 90% of people who've answered. So that's probably good enough. And we'll assume that the other 2 or 3 have wandered off for a cup of tea. Actually, now we're up to 93%. I don't think I'll hold out or make everybody wait for us to get 100% participation. So I am going to end it now. And thank you to all of you who have clicked through. So you can see the results if I click share. And now you can see the results. So it does look like the majority of you, 63%, either know that your workplace doesn't have a menopause policy or you're not sure about it, which makes it largely as effective as if there wasn't one anyway, about a menopause policy in place at your workplace. Only 37% were able to say yes, that they do. And then regardless of whether or not there's a policy in place, in terms of well-being support for menopause, 87% think that there should be that support in the workplace. 7% think not, and 7% are undecided, which is, I think, really, really interesting and something we should kind of reflect on and hopefully talk about. But I would really, really invite, welcome, and maybe plead with all of you, especially if you answered no or you're not sure to the second question, to put into the Q&A what your thoughts were. And just so you know, the session is being recorded, largely so we can share it with those that registered but maybe weren't able to attend at the last minute, and so people can view this after the fact, but not in a way to diminish hopefully the amount of engagement and the conversation that we can have with all of you. If you do post a question in the Q&A, note that it will be anonymous, so you don't have to worry about, oh, we're seeing that somebody from such and such workplace has said this, I wonder what that means about their policy. You would be still, your identity would be anonymous, even to us in the Q&A, if you so choose. But please do help us understand and make sure that we frame our topics here in our discussion to what's relevant to you, particularly if you said no to a menopause policy or you're not sure. But to the overwhelming majority that weren't sure or didn't know if their workplace had a menopause policy in place, let's then kick off, get in, and just start talking about, what are the most common menopause symptoms or perimenopausal symptoms that women experience, and therefore, what is the emotional and physical, both, impact of menopause and what it looks like then in the workplace. Do you mind starting us off, please?
Of course. So I think what's really interesting, and I hope we do come back to that 7%, because that 7% for me is really interesting, because I want to know why people don't think that the menopause, there should be a policy around it. And I get that in a funny sort of way, because menopause is normal. It's a physiological process that every woman will go through. And some people would view it as it's a natural process, so why do we need anything doing about it? Now, I think you do need to do something about it because of the myriad of symptoms and problems that the menopause throws up for the individual that gets reflected into the workplace. And there's a long discussion about how the workplace affects menopausal symptoms and how menopausal symptoms affect workplace and the work environment. Now, let's just use just a little bit on terminology. So when I or doctors think about the menopause, being very pedantic kind of people, we like a definition, and we would say that the menopause begins 1 year and 1 day after the last period. The time that symptoms start before that is the perimenopause, and I kind of think that's what most people talk about, the change when symptoms starts. That's the perimenopause. And in the UK, that's about 7 years before the menopause. Average age of menopause in the UK is 50, so around the age of 43. Now, it's not you wake up on your 43rd birthday and there's this shutter that comes down like a Looney Tunes cartoon that says, you are menopausal, you are perimenopausal. It doesn't happen like that. It's this slow, almost insidious beginning of symptoms that you would normally brush off and thinking, did I really mean to do that? Did I say that? Where are my keys? And the normal sort of feelings that we have, and they just seem to crescendo a little bit. No two women will ever begin with the same 2 symptoms. When I'm thinking about symptoms, there are certain symptoms that begin quite early on, and these are a lot of the psychological symptoms, mood disorder. I'm getting angry with people when I never used to get angry, even though whatever they're doing is very irritating. I sort of dealt with it, and now I don't deal with it. It just flips that switch, and then I'll feel bad about it. I'll regret it, and then I'll feel okay. So there's that mood disorder. Often can be quite serious with significant anxiety, with significant depressive symptoms, especially for those people who've had background anxiety, depressive illnesses in the past, and they're not sure if they're just anxious and depressive because they've been unwell in the past, or is this something new? And I spend a lot of time trying to tease out whether it's a new problem or it's just an exacerbation of old problems. And like everything in life, it's a bit of this and a bit of that. So mood disorder, anxiety, depression, brain fog. I just not as clear as I used to be able to do. I can't do the simple math that I used to do. I've forgotten where I left the car, the keys, the kids. It's all a bit of a mush in there. So there's this sort of very defocused psychological things that will happen quite early. And those are the things that must be terrifying for a woman in the workplace, because those aspects are very important to maintain in the workplace. So psychological ones are the ones that I will see quite early on. Then there'll be the more physical side effects that we're all sort of familiar with: the hot flushes, the night sweats, itchy skin, joint discomfort, muscle aches, the bladder problems leading to rush to the toilet, not able to hold the urine in for as long as possible, needing to get up at night more than once, more than twice, maybe getting a little bit more UTIs than I used to have, vaginal dryness, discomfort during sex, a loss of libido. So there's a whole change, or there's a whole group of symptoms there, and that's even before we start talking about menstrual irregularities. So changing in the cycle. My cycles got shorter, my cycles got longer, my periods are heavier, they're lighter, they're more irregular, they're further apart. So the menstrual disorders happen. We know that they're going to happen, but they may happen quite early on. But for some women, they seem to have all the symptoms of menopause and still have dreadful periods up until their mid-50s. So there's no one rule for everybody. There's a whole variety of symptoms. And you can see why I think you should have something in a guideline or policy in the workplace, because there's quite a lot of stuff I've just been talking about, and the workplace needs to take account of that and needs to help people through that. So employers are comfortable, and the companies are going to get the best out of their employees, as it were.
No, thank you for all of that. And one of the reasons I love working with you so much is you're clearly an expert, or if you're not an expert, you're such a good listener as a physician or a general practitioner, because you describe the symptoms as if you've been through them yourselves, which clearly I know is physiologically not possible. But I can attest to the fact that what you described is sort of bang on. And I think that it's important to maybe just recap when oftentimes we think about menopause or perimenopausal symptoms, you'll see it sort of dramatized, in film or on television or so with hot flushes. And if I'm honest, at least through my personal journey, I think that's been the least of my worries, in that maybe that woke me up and interrupted sleep overnight. But, it's not as if I therefore think that made it difficult for me to do my work. It was a lot of what you described as mood disorder. I'm going to start saying that when my husband starts critiquing me or something, but it is, for me, it was a combination of brain fog, as well as that used to never bother me. And now, whether it's anxiety or impatience or things, it is just having a sort of a lower threshold for things, which absolutely can then translate to anxiety and depression. And it's clearly lack of confidence as well at work. And I think that's the important thing. And then the third thing I would have mentioned is, whether it was because of hot flushes or otherwise, I do think fatigue is really quite impactful for me anyway. I used to think that I could do well on, relatively little sleep. And now I find myself really, really tired at some points during the day. And I really don't have any explanation for it, because there might have been nothing different about my sleep the night before. And it really does just affect, cognitive thinking, as well as patience and tolerance and mood disorders describing and all of that. So, and I love that somebody's already sort of chipping in. So I do want to remind people, please, let's make this an interactive conversation. I've mentioned I love listening and talking to Gideon, but we do get the benefit of speaking to each other relatively frequently, because even today we're in the office together. And so we really want to hear from you. Somebody has kindly offered that they're finding they really have to drink a lot more water due to their night sweats, and because of, I guess, the hot flushes and what they're perspiring. And if they don't drink enough water, obviously they then get sort of lightheaded and dizzy when they stand up. And they would like to know if this goes on forever. And it's a great question, because I've asked that myself a million times. So Gideon, what do you say to that?
So thank you for posting the question. And when I saw that flash up, I thought, God, there's quite a lot in this question. So the question is, as Eileen was saying, I find that I need to drink more because I'm sweating at night. If I don't drink enough, then I will get a bit dizzy when I stand up. Is this normal, and does this go on forever? So there's a whole bunch of stuff there. So first of all, night sweats is a really frequent symptom in women going through the menopause, and it's great that you brought in sleep, because sleep is one of the biggest problems that I seem to come across. So problems falling asleep, what we call onset insomnia. Sometimes waking up anxious at 2 o'clock in the morning, waking up 3 times because I need a wee, waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning because I'm worried about stuff that I shouldn't worry about, like, did I put cling film on the chicken? It's crazy. So sleep is a really big thing. So first of all, hot sweats and night sweats is a very common symptom, and it's a fascinating subject. Why do women get it? Now, you need to drink water. Please drink water. The problem is, if you don't drink water, then that's just going to make you feel dehydrated, and nobody wants to wake up in the morning dehydrated. And why am I waking up with in the morning if I don't drink, with feeling a bit dizzy? First of all, just get your blood pressure checked with your GP. Just get your blood pressure checked. Make sure there isn't an underlying blood pressure disorder. If you are dehydrated, you will feel dreadful and lightheaded when you wake up. So just need to make sure they haven't got any blood pressure issues. And then there's this really crucial question that you're asking again: does this go on forever? And one of my top 3 questions that I get is, when will I have gone through all the terrible menopausal symptoms? If I start taking hormones, will I need to stay on them forever? Will my symptoms return if I stop my hormones, and will I need to stay on hormones forever? So there's a lot in that question. Now, does this go on forever? Now, the honest answer to that is it will get much better without any intervention over time. And you can see that I've given a real doctor's question there because it's just not that succinct. How many years is it? And most women will pass most of their worst vasomotor symptoms. So these are hot flushes, night sweats within 5 years of their last period. And some women, it'll be like 2 months. 5 years is a relatively good duration. What I would say is that it will pass, but you will always have the odd symptom return from time to time. So it'll be mostly gone within 5 years, but you'll have the odd symptom in the future from time to time. I suppose it's then into a longer discussion about how to deal with those symptoms. And with all sleep disorders, it's getting into that good sleep behavior. I'm not going to use that terrible term sleep hygiene because I think it's horrible, but into good sleep behavior, which we all should do. I'm terrible about that. I'm sure Eileen's brilliant at it. It's really difficult to get into good sleep behavior, and that will help. And then there's all the necessities of sleeping in a dark room with good ventilation, light bed clothing, and having a supportive partner. So there's a lot into that. But the question that I really like here is, does this go on for that? It's a very difficult question to answer.
Thanks for trying. Thanks for giving it your best shot. And I'm sure that was helpful for them. And we're getting other comments too. First of all, one which I thought was pretty bang on. It's funny that we call night sweats, since it happens all throughout the day as well. But I guess we're calling night sweats what happened at night and hot flushes what happens when we're awake, even though they're effectively the same thing. At least from my point of view, I don't know if medically they're different, but given I'm assuming they're the same thing and we just call them different things, whether or not we're awake or asleep. So we've got other questions actually about tips and stuff. I want to hold on to those or park those for a second. And I really love how much people are chipping in. But I'm going to park that because I think that's what we're going to come on to now. Having sort of established that there are sufficient emotional and physical symptoms that are clearly going to be impacting women when they're at work, as well as sort of when they're sleeping, which then has knock-on effects for work. I think we're working to establish that it would be therefore a positive thing to have some form of support for women at work as they might be going through menopause. Now, again, would love to hear from people who had responded, no, they didn't think or weren't sure yet about whether or not there should be support in the workplace yet, just to make sure, Gideon tried to anticipate why some people might think that, but just to make sure we're covering all the bases and having a conversation that's really relevant to everyone here. So please chip in and let us know what you had in mind when you said that. But I think then we will go into how we could do that. So what are the best ways then, Gideon? If we establish that for enough people, there are sufficient reasons to want to support people at work or for people to get that support for themselves, what are some of the ways or the best ways to support people through menopause and how to put that in place? I think, while you think on, I don't know if you're going to do a top few or a list, I will sort of also reiterate things, such as workplaces wanting to do this, not only to support their colleagues so that they can be their best selves at work and deliver their best work and be the most productive that they can be, but clearly workplaces are more focused than ever on diversity, equity, and inclusion agendas. They're wanting to create an inclusive culture. They're wanting to make it clear that they're there to support individuals. Women, as we know, make up 51% of the population, large portion of the workforce. I think it's 13 million women are estimated to be going through menopause today, right now in the UK. The vast majority of those do work outside the home, and yet 40 or 42% of them will consider leaving work because of their symptoms. And so it is an imperative for workplaces to at least think about it. They could make a conscious decision not to provide support, and that's fine. That might be a commercial view. But if they're looking to retain top talent, if they're looking to retain people with high tenure, with great experience, strong networks, and great track records, we think that that's why they're probably looking to put support in place. And, for example, there's a company called Edzuna that often does a lot of work with the ONS and looks at job adverts and is a really good proxy for what's happening with job adverts and the like. And they're actually showing that job adverts or job descriptions that mention menopause leave have doubled in recent periods. And so we are seeing more and more companies at least recognizing they need to acknowledge this. And so what do we think are the best ways that companies then, in addition to talking about menopause leave as one maybe specific tactic, what do you think are some ways to support women at work?
Hi, Eileen, thanks for that. I think when, at the very least, very least, there needs to be acknowledgement that the menopause is a real thing and that has significant effects, as you were just saying. So I think the very least that a policy needs to have is that the menopause happens and that it will affect the employee. And once you acknowledge something and you name it and you don't brush it under the carpet, you can deal with it. So the first aspect that I would look at in any work environment is cultural integrity and cultural structure. So we acknowledge that the menopause is there, we name it, we can say that it's a thing, and then we can build around it and say, yes, the menopause is a thing, it's going to have consequences on the employee, and we should build an environment and a culture that allows us to be understanding towards the employee so the employee can work to the best of their ability. So for instance, the last example, the woman who has night sweats, and she'll be getting up and she may need to strip the clothes off the bed sheets because she is, that she's pouring with sweat. And that must be terrible to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and change all your bed clothes and everything. And that's going to disrupt your sleep. That's going to disrupt, and you're not going to be firing all cylinders at 6:30 or 7 o'clock in the morning. And that woman needs to have the flexibility in her work so that she can go in a bit later or work from home and to have some understanding, because if she battles through it like we all do, that you won't get the best out of her, and she will be unhappy, and then you want her to be productive in the workplace. And so I think flexibility of working is, for me, the most important aspect of this, and the ability the ability of the individual to be able to talk about how they feel and say, listen, Eileen, I feel a bit lousy. I'm just not right. Do you mind if I step out for 5 minutes? And then I'll be back. And to have that room, but to have that cultural structure, that cultural integrity, where it's okay to say, I feel a bit lousy, just give me 5 minutes. Just give me 5 minutes. I'm feeling a bit hot. I need to go to the loo. I just need to cool down. Just give me a break. And I think it's the cultural change that we need to bring in. So for me, the basics of this are quite simple. Have a policy that says the menopause is a thing, name it, and then deal with it. And dealing with it is to initially to bring in a culture where it's okay to talk about these problems. And doctors always talk about some of these metaphors. And so if an employer has a broken leg, you make an adjustment for that. You make adjustment for the individual because you want to keep the individual in the workplace and you want them to be happy so that they work well, blah, blah, blah. So I kind of think it's just this understanding, naming what it is and building up a culture around it. And I think one of the most important things is actually allowing people to be flexible in how they work and how they deliver their work to the company.
That's really great to hear. Thank you. And I think I couldn't agree with you more. I think flexibility is key. So you've mentioned sort of flexible working hours, potentially flexibility in terms of when someone could maybe step away from their desk or their area of work, just flexibility in terms of taking a time out, perhaps. Said that, we're desk-based and we probably can't afford flexibility from time to time. There will clearly be lots of industries or sectors or workplaces where they might not have that type of flexibility. And so the rest of what you said, Gideon, I think is just as important, which is this awareness and this cultural change to acknowledge and address the consequences of menopause. What do you think about things like, employee networks, a menopause advocate, a menopause champion? Do you think that's the kind of thing that can help to drive the cultural change when there are other, things that might be a constraint?
Yeah, thanks for that. Having a menopause champion or a spokesperson is very important, and it counts as an area to focus for there to be a voice for those of us that don't like to talk about our personal journey. And it's fine to talk about the personal stuff here, where we all are now at this moment in time, because we're all very comfortable with the environment and the ability to ask questions. But I know it's going to be very difficult for many women in the workplace, especially in where they may have male managers or even female managers who are less than understanding it happens. So it's having a workplace champion or a spokesperson, I think, is very important. My feeling about it is that every woman's journey is different, and just from the questions that are coming in now, everybody's got like a different journey and a different question and a different take on what's happening to them. And so it's important for that menopause person to have some training in menopause. It's important for that person to have some training in listening. And listening doesn't mean advising. Listening means listening and hearing what people's problems are in their workplace. And so the adjustments can be made to that individual. So what I mean by that is the workplace champion may not have night sweats. They may not have that symptom. There may not even be a woman going to, but that they need to know that that happens and it has affected their colleague in that way, even though it's not part of their journey. So menopause spokespeople are really important, and it's really important that those people are supported themselves in their listening ability and their ability to take on their colleagues' concerns and what's important to them in their workplace, because it can vary from person to person a great deal. So I'll see a lot of women who've got anxiety, depressive symptoms, and they might need somebody to talk to and say, listen, I can't stand how my partner leaves stuff around the house, and I've bottled it up for 20 years, and now I just can't deal with it anymore. I want to offload that stuff. So some women will have had that problem, and others women. So what I'm saying is learn how to listen and learn how to take those concerns onto management and the way forward.
Super, thank you. And so kind of carrying on with that theme in terms of, a menopause champion or an advocate who listens and then helps to hopefully try and drive change within the organization, or at least more greater awareness. Obviously, at Fertifa, we work a lot with HR managers, well-being managers, and line managers. And so I think, we'd be remiss if not to mention that in addition to that, educating sort of managers, I think is a really big part of affecting, or at least tabling some kind of support. Because to your point about awareness, name it, acknowledge it's a thing. I think there probably are a lot of managers, male, female, of all age, who might not be aware that there are consequences that can impact maybe the deliverables they're waiting for, right, from their colleagues or their team members. And so educating managers, I think, is a big part of it as well. Would you agree?
Yeah, so at Fertifa, we spend a lot of time talking about menopause and open with it. Within the NHS, where I spend a lot of my life, there is surprisingly little quarter given to menopause and menopausal symptoms, and you kind of think that it would be quite built into the NHS, where we have majority female workers, but it's not. So I think that most employees will feel that they're out on a limb, they're the only people. But menopause, as just about all of women's health, has been really taken been not well delivered, both in the public and the private sector. And what I'm trying to say is that this is and why I get excited about the menopause work, because it's going to bring more equality to the workplace to improve people's lives. And why am I interested in that as a man? Well, I kind of want there to be equality for everybody across all health parameters. And it's important for us to know that everybody's involved in menopause. So there's the woman who's going through the symptoms. There's the employer who's trying to manage her. There's the woman in her home life who's dealing with children and relationships and partners. And there needs to be a huge amount of education for all these people, for the employers, for the partners, and for the family as a whole. So upscaling of education is so important, because if you think about it, if there was loads and loads and loads of really good education and support for women going through the menopause, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't need to do this. And it's because there isn't that resource, and there hasn't been that education in schools, and medical schools are no different, that is so lacking. And it never fails to surprise me that I'll speak to really well-educated people through Fertifa, really smart, very well-educated people, and they'll know next to absolutely nothing about reproductive health care and the menopause. And I understand why, but they'll say, oh my God, that's something that happened to my mum. And we don't really talk about it in our family. We're not that kind of family. We just don't talk about it. And that needs to move away from a conversation about, yeah, it's going to happen. And the way I like to think about it is 35, how old am I? Like 50 years ago, people never used to talk about sex. It kind of happened, but people never used to talk about it. People never used to talk about contraception. And then there were these Dutch nutters that started talking about contraception in school. And suddenly, overnight, teenage pregnancies in the Netherlands crashed, okay? Because they were educated. So in the same way, we need to educate everybody involved and surrounding that menopausal woman to give her support.
Well, that's brilliantly said. And you've got participants who are sort of saying here for you for saying that, and that call to action. And I'm going to use that then as a transition to, what forms of education could exist or could be brought in, again, to support women going through menopause at work. And I realized that I absolutely failed our marketing team because I didn't introduce Fertifa at all in our organization. But also that gives me a chance to say, I'm not here just to pitch Fertifa. That's not why Gid and I are here. We're here hopefully to pitch the idea that we need to have greater awareness of menopause, the consequences, the symptoms, and the impact on people at work, and how to help organizations then get policies or support in place before World Menopause Awareness Day in October. But one way clearly is to work with an organization like ours. It doesn't have to be ours. We're really, really proud to have a great peer group of other providers that do and provide menopause support as well for workplaces. But I, would be remiss not to explain that that is clearly something that a workplace can do. And I'm sure that there's a provider, a vendor, a partner, even a set of solutions from one vendor that will fit any size organization and any type of budget. But it goes along with everything that Gideon's been saying in terms of acknowledgement, addressing the issue, informing and educating managers, other colleagues, and then also providing the support, therefore, for people going through menopause. So having said all that, and I'll obviously come back to that, because I think that this is the kind of crux of our webinar, and the topic, Gideon, was how to support and how to put support in place for people. So I'll come back to it and recap it at the end. But something that's come to mind based on some of the anonymous kind of comments or the questions are, if someone's at a workplace where it is not yet a topic that's discussed, if maybe senior management is not yet attuned to this, not yet sensitive to it, not one of the companies that's advertising menopause leave in their job adverts, for example, how then can people drive cultural change in their organization and start these conversations? Particularly if, like you said, they're not ones to want to start their personal journey or put that out on display. How can we advise, or what would you suggest to people for having these very sensitive conversations at work? What would you suggest to HR managers who are trying to support their team members? How would you suggest to individuals that might be going through it that they might broach the topic with line managers? Do you have any advice or suggestions there?
Yeah. How I would approach this is to consider menopause, as I've said a couple of times now, as part of the natural process of all women. And actually, this shouldn't be taken separately from the natural processes that everybody goes through, so women and men. And we should bring equity and equality into the workplace. So my feeling would be to bring this into conversation as part of a wider health and well-being discussion. So the way that I would frame this is to bring up into a forum, and I suppose that would differ between different workplaces, that we need to consider the well-being of our workforce. And I suppose I'm very simplistic, and I think a happy workforce and a healthy workforce is a productive and a profitable workforce. I suppose that's the very simplistic way that I would look upon it. And I would say that we need to look at well-being and healthcare of our employees, and that includes women's health, men's health, contraceptive health, sexual health, mental health. So, and I don't put any more emphasis on one aspect of well-being above another. And so what I would say is that we need to look at the well-being of our workforce. And there are various aspects, and these include, and menopause is one of them. And then that will begin a conversation as, you know what? All women will have a menopause, and we may not like to talk about it, but you know it happens, I know it happens, we all know it happens. And the same thing as we know that all men will have, or very likely to have, some degree of prostatic cancer when they die. And that's an eye-opener, because people say, what? And then that begins a conversation about, should we screen? Should we not screen? And actually, then there's a side conversation. You know what? I've got problems in going to the toilet at night. Maybe we should bring in somebody to talk about that. And then the conversation will snowball. So I would begin the conversation in a very generic but super important way of looking at well-being and health as a whole, and then subdivide it into the various packages that I've just discussed.
Oh, that's brilliant, because actually somebody did launch this question in the Q&A. Don't know if you had a chance to see it, but their question was whether or not menopause support should be implemented along with other areas of reproductive health support in order to make it the greatest impact, or have the greatest impact, especially from a workplace culture point of view. I think your response just there sort of suggested that probably maximizes the impact, because it's addressing a productivity point for a workplace or for management with respect to the workforce, and where you get greatest productivity and contributions from people. You frame it in well-being more broadly, of which reproductive health is part of that, and then of which menopause, which will affect every single woman, is clearly a big part of that as well. So you've also not only answered my question, but then anticipated one of the other questions that was in the Q&A. So thank you so much. We have about 15 minutes to go, actually 12 minutes to go before the hour. I typically like to end these webinars a few minutes before the hour so that people don't have to go back to back if they've got another meeting. So therefore, I'm going to just go through some of that. I'm going to try and bring in some of the other questions and some of the other comments, if that's okay, Gideon, and then come back to a recap, if that's all right, because I think you've said so many really, really important things that I do want to make sure they get enumerated towards the end. But in addition to that question, which was about other types of reproductive health, one other question was whether or not, do you think private healthcare providers should include menopause benefit? Maybe this is not actually a medical question, it's more of a philosophical or maybe a political question, but do you think, or do you know of PMI providers that cover menopause within their schemes? And I'm happy to help answer it too.
I suppose I look upon this in a typical British NHS consultant way, and with a view of PMI, in that if I was running a PMI, I probably wouldn't want to include menopause, because I know every one of my female clients is going to claim, and that doesn't seem to be a smart way of running an insurance company. However, It doesn't mean that every woman will, because some women won't have problems. And it's only a subset of those women that do need intervention. I think all PMI providers should provide much better menopause care than they do. That's for sure. Some PMI providers do offer some degree of menopause consultation and support. I believe that there has been a sea change in menopause care in the United Kingdom. That sea change has yet to wash onto the shore, if I'm going to use the same metaphor. But we can see things like prescription charges changing, access to GPs with some menopause care, understanding improving, but there's a huge way to go still. So some PMIs do. I understand why PMIs don't. But I think what they should do is provide a lot more care, and that probably would result in the end in a lot fewer claims, because they would head off a lot of the simple stuff.
I think that's a really fair and balanced answer, because you're right. If we put ourselves in the shoes of the insurance company, you can understand why they've done what they've done. Having said that, from a well-being point of view, it would be perhaps more sort of long-term thinking and strategically better to do that. The only bit I would add to that, for whatever it's worth, that, is at Fertifa, we work with our corporate clients, and every single corporate client that has partnered with us in order to provide support to their colleagues and their employees already has private medical insurance cover in place for, what PMI has typically covered. And so we often we do always live alongside, and it's sort of seen as supplementary care, probably for the reasons that Gideon mentioned, that an insurer, private medical insurance, wouldn't cover. Another question that we're having is, I'll stick on the clinical point and then I'll switch away, but looking at all these questions, the great questions that are coming in, is there a way for women to be tested to see where they are hormonally from a perimenopause or menopause standpoint? And you're smiling because we talk about this a lot, but I can't wait to hear your answer, because I always enjoy it.
Okay, so if a woman is, the very simple answer to that is a simple answer. If you're still having periods, doctors and doctors and practitioners shouldn't really do too much hormone testing, other than to rule out other causes for symptoms. So, for instance, a woman with a thyroid problem might develop some symptoms that could be associated with menopause. But actually, once a woman is into her mid-40s, there's no point in testing, because first of all, one scenario from those blood tests will be that the tests show that the hormones are deranged and there's a hormonal problem. The second scenario might be the hormones are normal and she's still got symptoms. And the third thing that one has to take into account is that during a woman's fertile reproductive life, let's just say in her mid-30s, her cycles, if she's not on contraception, will normally be quite regular, following, as it were, sheet music. But as a woman gets older, the eggs and the ovaries, they don't follow the sheet music, and they go into a bit of a freestyle jazz, and they do what they want. They will do what they want, and sometimes they'll be high and sometimes they'll be low, and then when you think they should be high, they will be low, and vice versa. So the result that we get might not be that helpful. So what do you do? Well, if a woman's from her early to mid-40s onwards and she's getting symptomatic, then the best thing you could do is listen to her symptoms, figure out if there's something that you can do about those symptoms with lifestyle, with dietary change, with exercise. If that's not helping, then you're going to give some hormones. And there's a very simple premise that if the problems go away with hormone treatment, then a hormone deficiency was probably the root cause. If hormone replacement doesn't treat symptoms, then either you've got your dosage wrong or there's something else going on. So testing is not something that we do. I know it's done a lot in some paradigms of medicine, but it's actually not that helpful, because symptoms don't always relate to blood test levels. So let's just say I've got a woman who's got a blood test of 12. She may have symptoms, she may not have symptoms. And if she's got symptoms, then she needs to do something about it, whether her levels are normal or not, if she's in her mid-40s. So no, don't really tend to do much testing, which is good for doctors because they don't have to follow the results up. And the best way of looking after a woman who's in menopause is to listen to what her problems are, what her symptoms are, what her complications of treatments are, and then go from there. And Eileen, can I just jump into one of the questions that have come up there? It's a woman who's, thank you very much for your question, who's got some brain fog in spite of some HRT treatment. And this is really, and this is fascinating. And so, because she's probably thinking, well, you're talking rubbish, Gideon, because I'm getting HRT and I've still got these symptoms. Why have I still got these symptoms? And it's one to tease apart. So the question was a woman who's using transdermal, so estrogen through the skin, and still got some symptoms. Well, when we think about symptoms are never just due to one thing, and there's this overlapping of hormones, of age, and an environment. And hormones is just one aspect of that. And so symptoms like brain fog can just be due to hormones, but there's other stuff that's going to be going on, and perhaps looking into that. And then the final answer to your question is, if a woman has symptoms that persist, even though she's on HRT, I might look at some blood levels of the estrogen then, just to make sure the absorption is okay. Because some women might take a lot of transdermal estrogen, lots of it on a high dose, but actually not absorbing that much. So it's probably worth investigating what your blood hormone levels are, your estrogen levels are, just to double check that you're absorbing the right amount of estrogen.
Thanks for that. And thanks for wrapping that up with that other person's question. I think there's another question that what you just said also relates to too, who was sort of asking for tips relating to less energy and sleeplessness, but sleepless. Yeah. And I want to actually, I said I was going to give people a little bit of time back, but actually there's one more question I'm going to go to before I wrap up. I also want to just kind of wrap the last thing you just said, because it was a specific question about whether or not there is diagnostic testing that can be done to help women identify whether or not they're going through perimenopause or menopause. And just to frame or recap what you said, one could do a hormone test to see whether or not there's a hormone deficiency. However, I'm really proud of our sort of position here at Fertifa, which is if a woman's in her mid-40s or older, we wouldn't encourage a test because she's going through menopause or perimenopause. And the question is simply the severity of her symptoms and then how to help her through those. And we know there are, as I mentioned, we've got a lot of great peers in our sector. There will be people who will sell testing kits, and we sell testing kits, but we wouldn't advise them for someone of a certain age. And you can get them, but the focus should be on how to support women and their symptoms, not, is this clinically diagnosed as menopause or not, especially if they're in their mid-40s. The last question I want to make sure we pick up on that was lodged was how to engage with men in the workplace to attend sessions around menopause. We've talked a lot about cultural change. We've talked about the education. And actually this person is saying even more broadly about women's health in general to help men understand and support the women that they work with and also in their personal lives. Do you have something you might want to say in just a few seconds, Gideon, as we almost run out of time?
Okay, so a quick one here. So it's really important to not group all people into one grouping, so all women or all men, and men's understanding of the menopause is actually different at different times in their lives. So a very quick one, I was talking to some teenagers and some younger guys about menopause and female healthcare, and there was kind of like a lot of uncomfortability about it, and just like, it's just like my mum. And I said to them, how would you feel if you woke up one day and you had no sex drive and your body just wasn't yours anymore and it looked like a different person's body? How would you like that? How would you like never to have sex drive? How would you like that? And to be uncomfortable and achy all the time? Would you like that? And there's, everybody's, you mentioned sex to young men, they start listening. And they said they started listening. And I said, well, that's what it's like. And you have, sex drive and you have your body because of hormones, and those hormones are gone, then things are going to go wrong a little bit. And that's what's happening to women in their 40s and 50s. It's not a joke, it's a real thing, it happens. And we should be kind, and we should be considerate, and we should be understanding of people. And I kind of think although I wouldn't use that that verbal model on everybody, I would change it with men who are a bit older and say, listen, this is your wives, your partners, and these are people you work with. You need to understand what's going on with them. And actually, if you make sure that their work environment is better by supporting them, then your work environment will be better. So if you're not going to do it for them, which you should do it for yourselves and for everybody around you, because it'll be a much nicer place to come to work, because there's a much better understanding of each other's problems.
That's such a great recap. Thank you, Gideon. And now it's bang on 2 o'clock. So before people start to drop off, I'll just recap what you just said. And you've gone back to your original point, which I love, which is we're really talking about well-being more fundamentally, and how to ensure that people can bring their best selves and do their best work at work. And so if we think about well-being and we care about well-being, reproductive health is incredibly important, has major consequences. Within that, every single woman will go through menopause. And in some way, shape, or form, there will be consequences of that. It'll manifest itself differently at different times for different durations of different periods. It could be in sleeplessness, it could be in hot flushes, it could be in brain fog, could be in anxiety, but it also could be a wide range of physical symptoms as well as emotional symptoms. And it's important, therefore, that workplaces really identify this and understand that it is impactful, that it is very tangible, and that it's really important. And therefore, to think about how to support people doing that. You highlighted that the greatest form of support would be flexibility, even if that's flexibility in giving people a few seconds to compose themselves or to get a break, and so on and so forth, or as far as flexibility within hours and working conditions and the like. We've talked about how organizations can use menopause champions or employee networks to try and help drive the conversation if people don't want to have, these conversations about their own personal situations. And so there are so many more things to do. And of course, I have to mention that, a workplace could work with an organization like Fertifa, maybe not us specifically, but also those in our peer group and others in our sector who provide both clinical advice, navigational support, and also even just well-being support in terms of supporting somebody through a reproductive health journey, but particularly menopause. And I really appreciate people staying on for as long as they have done. While I was just trying to do that wrap up, I wanted to make sure I also posted in the chat for everyone that we do really, really look at all of your feedback and wish to continue to improve the content and the conversations that we have with you and that we deliver to and for you. So please, if you get a moment to click on that Typeform link, we'd appreciate hearing what you think about it. We will also be sending around another chance to respond to that Typeform tomorrow, as well as a recording to this and a webinar that we did also on menopause last week as well. And we appreciate everyone's time. Thank you for all the thank yous that are coming in as well in the chat. And thank you, of course, to Gideon for everything that you've shared and offered, all the great advice and everything from all of your experiences. So thanks so much to everybody. Hope everyone has a good rest of their days and that we get to hear from all of you and maybe work with you in future. Thanks so much, everybody. Take care. Bye, Gideon.
Bye.